Sarah stood on the balcony of their sprawling Beverly Hills estate, her hands gently cradling the tiny curve of her belly. At 42, she had almost given up on becoming a mother. After years of IVF cycles, miscarriages, and silent prayers whispered into the night, the test had finally turned positive. She was pregnant. A miracle, as the doctors called it. A second chance at a dream she and Daniel had once shared with sparkling eyes and late-night talks under the stars. And yet, as she looked out at the manicured gardens and the skyline beyond, something didn't feel right. Their life, to anyone else, was a fairy tale. Daniel Montgomery, billionaire CEO of Montgomery Enterprises, was constantly on the covers of Forbes and GQ, praised for his charm, business genius, and philanthropic work. Sarah, a former attorney, had left her high-profile career to support Daniel's rise and dedicate herself to his world, hosting charity galas, managing foundations, and being the poised wife always at his side. Their marriage had weathered storms. She had been there when he was building his empire, sacrificing her own career ambitions, walking through financial risk and media scrutiny, always with her hand in his. People called them the golden couple. And for a long time, Sarah believed it too. The pregnancy had felt like a reward for her loyalty, her endurance, and her hope. When she'd told Daniel, she had expected tears, hugs, and laughter. Instead, he'd blinked in silence, the smile that followed more polite than joyous. He'd muttered something about being happy for her, for us, before checking his phone and excusing himself to take a call. She had watched him walk away, her hand still resting on her abdomen, trying to make sense of his coldness. Since that day, Daniel had become increasingly distant. He was always working late, flying to New York or London or Tokyo for deals that seemed more frequent than usual. He canceled dinners, skipped her OB appointments, and barely spoke to her at home. At first, she told herself he was just stressed, that his empire needed him. But deep down, she felt a shift, an emotional chasm growing silently between them. He used to call her Sparrow, and kiss her on the forehead every morning before his run. Now, he barely noticed when she entered a room. He slept on his side of the bed, back turned, phone always face down on the nightstand. She had asked him once if everything was all right. He had laughed and kissed her forehead like a child needing reassurance, not a partner needing truth. Then he disappeared into meetings for the rest of the day. The house felt colder lately. The giant crystal chandelier above the staircase didn't gleam the way it used to. The laughter that once echoed off marble floors was gone. Sarah tried to fill the silence with nursery shopping, planning baby shower themes, and writing letters to her unborn child. But even as she surrounded herself with pastel colors and lullaby playlists, the weight in her chest grew heavier. People still praised their love story at galas and charity balls. Cameras still flashed when they arrived together, his arm looped around her waist. But behind the lens, his hand always felt stiff. Like a duty. Like a show. She wondered if he had stopped loving her, or if he was just scared of becoming a father at 45. But the truth gnawed at her, refusing to be silenced by logic or hope. Sarah had spent 2 decades building a life with Daniel, believing in him, trusting him, loving him. But now, as she stood alone in a mansion filled with everything money could buy, she couldn't help but feel it. Something was breaking. And she didn't know if it could be saved. Sarah had spent all morning planning the moment. She wanted it to be special, something they would remember forever. The dining room table was set with fresh lilies, Daniel's favorite. A small velvet box sat at his place, not with jewelry inside, but with a tiny pair of white baby shoes and a handwritten note. Coming soon, baby Montgomery. ETA. February. She wore the pale blue silk dress he once said made her glow, and applied the same soft perfume he'd bought her on their 10th anniversary. Her heart fluttered with nerves and hope. This was their miracle. After everything they had been through, the hormone injections, the painful procedures, the heart-wrenching losses, this baby wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of everything they'd survived. When Daniel walked in, she stood up with a wide smile, her hands trembling with anticipation. "I have a surprise," she said softly. He looked up from his phone briefly, confused, then walked toward the table. "What's all this?" "Just open it," she whispered. He opened the velvet box and stared. For a moment, his face froze. Then, a tight smile spread across his lips. Polished, performative. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice flat. She nodded, waiting for the moment he would laugh, lift her into his arms, maybe even cry like she had when the doctor confirmed it. But none of that came. Instead, he sat down, already glancing back at his phone. "That's great," he said distractedly. "Really great." A chime interrupted them. Daniel glanced at the screen and stood abruptly. "I have to take this. Sorry, love. Big merger. Been waiting on this call all day." She watched him disappear into his office, the door shutting quietly behind him. The shoes lay forgotten on the table. That night, she lay awake in bed, the memory of his reaction haunting her. She wanted to believe it was just stress, just bad timing. But something told her otherwise. He didn't come to bed until after midnight, and when he did, he barely acknowledged her. No kiss. No hand on her stomach. No whispered promises of a future. The next morning, over coffee, she brought up the first prenatal appointment scheduled for Friday. He looked at his calendar, then shook his head. "Can't make it. I'm flying to Chicago for that investor summit." "But, it's our first scan," she said quietly. He shrugged. "We'll have plenty more." The words stung like ice water. In the past, he had never missed a medical appointment. When she broke her ankle 10 years ago, he skipped an entire shareholders' meeting just to sit beside her hospital bed. Now, with their first child on the way, she felt like an afterthought. Every day after that felt lonelier. Daniel left for his trip with barely a kiss goodbye. Sarah stood at the door, her hand instinctively on her stomach, watching his sleek black car disappear down the long driveway. The house fell silent again, but this time, it felt emptier than ever. She wanted to believe he just needed time, that the shock would fade, and he'd return to her as the man she married. But deep down, something colder had taken root. And she feared it was growing faster than the life inside her. Sarah stirred honey into her tea, barely tasting it. She sat across from Eliza in the cozy corner of their favorite cafe, a place they had frequented since their law school days. The sunlight streamed through the window, but Sarah felt chilled, as though something invisible had draped itself over her shoulders. She was quieter than usual, her thoughts tangled in loops she couldn't unravel on her own. Eliza watched her carefully, eyes narrowing. "You've barely said 2 words since you sat down," she said. "What's going on?" Sarah hesitated, fingers curling around the warm ceramic of her mug. "It's Daniel," she finally said. "He's been off. Ever since I told him about the baby. He's cold, distant. He skipped the appointment, Eliza. Our first scan." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like him. You're not imagining this." "I don't think so. I wish I were." Sarah sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "He used to be so excited about having a family. He used to hold me after every miscarriage and tell me we'd get through it together. But now, it's like I'm a stranger." Eliza leaned in. "You think something's going on?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "But I can't shake this feeling. I see how he looks at his phone. He guards it like a secret. He comes home late and doesn't even try to explain anymore." "Then don't ignore your instincts," Eliza said gently. "You've always had a sharp gut, Sar. Maybe it's time you stopped doubting yourself." The next morning, Sarah waited until Daniel left for another early meeting. The house felt too quiet as she made her way to his home office, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't who she was, snooping through drawers and files. She had never needed to. But something inside her had cracked open, and the silence between them had become deafening. She sat down at his mahogany desk and opened the bottom drawer. It was locked. She checked the top drawer, loose papers, bills, nothing unusual. But in the file cabinet tucked to the side, she found a small, slim envelope marked Invoices. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first paper was a receipt from the Fairmont Grand Hotel, a suite booked for 3 nights just last week. Daniel had told her he was in San Francisco on business. Her eyes scanned the check-in details. It was in Los Angeles, just 30 minutes from home. Another slip of paper. A receipt from Cartier. A necklace with a sapphire pendant and a matching pair of diamond earrings. She hadn't received a gift in months. Her birthday had come and gone with just a card and a tired smile from Daniel. She dropped the papers, her breath catching. Her mind fought to rationalize, to explain it away. Maybe it was a surprise for her, maybe there was a business dinner at the hotel. But the pit in her stomach churned deeper. For the first time in 20 years, she wondered, is my husband cheating on me? And she couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was yes. It was nearly 8 in the evening when Sarah parked her car 2 blocks away from the Fairmont Grand Hotel. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as the dashboard clock ticked louder than it should. Her heartbeat thrummed in her ears like a war drum. The streets were dim and quiet, lit by amber streetlights and the passing glow of expensive sedans pulling up to the valet. Every part of her told her to go home, to forget this, to give Daniel the benefit of the doubt. But the receipts, the coldness, the growing distance, none of it would let her rest. She needed the truth, even if it broke her. Wearing a simple black coat and a low-brimmed hat, she stepped out and walked slowly toward the hotel entrance, staying in the shadows. Her heart raced wildly, and her stomach twisted so tightly she thought she might be sick. The Grand Hotel looked even more lavish in person. Gold-trimmed doors. A red carpet entryway. Bellhops in tailored suits ushering guests into elegance. She slipped into the lobby unnoticed and ducked behind a wide marble column near the elevator banks. Her hands trembled as she checked her phone. 8:13 p.m. Any moment now. And then she saw him. Daniel entered through the revolving doors, adjusting the cuff of his designer coat like he hadn't a care in the world. His hair was neatly styled, his tailored suit hugging his frame like a second skin. He looked confident, relaxed. Not like a man hiding a secret, but like one enjoying a second life. Then came her. Cassandra. She was younger, much younger, maybe 25 or 26, with long auburn hair that bounced in soft waves down her back. Her body was wrapped in a red silk dress that clung to her like she'd been poured into it. Her heels clicked confidently across the marble floor as she joined Daniel at the elevators. She laughed at something he said, tossing her hair over her shoulder. He leaned in, whispering in her ear, and then he took her hand. Sarah's breath hitched. She gripped the edge of the column, her nails digging into the cool stone. It was like watching a scene from someone else's life, or a cruel soap opera played out in real time. She wanted to scream, to run up and rip Cassandra away, to demand answers. But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. As the elevator doors opened, Daniel placed his hand gently on the small of Cassandra's back and guided her inside. Their fingers stayed laced together. Just before the doors shut, Cassandra reached up and kissed his cheek, leaving a light lipstick stain behind. Sarah stumbled back a step, clutching her chest as if it could hold in the pain. Her knees nearly buckled, and she had to press her back to the column to stay upright. The hotel lobby seemed to spin, voices blurred into muffled echoes. A marriage built over 2 decades had just crumbled in a span of 60 seconds. And all she could do was hide and watch it fall apart. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced them back. Not here. Not where strangers could see her. She turned and walked as quickly as her legs would carry her, slipping out into the cold night air. Her hands were shaking so badly that it took her 2 tries to unlock her car door. As she sat behind the wheel, staring blankly ahead, the only thing she could hear was Daniel's voice from years ago, whispering promises under their wedding arch. I will never betray you. But he had. And now, she was alone, with a baby on the way and a heart that would never be the same. Sarah waited in the living room, the clock ticking louder with every second that passed. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale from the pressure. The silence in the house was thick, suffocating. She had turned off the lights, leaving only the dim glow of a single lamp to cast shadows across the floor. The velvet box with the baby shoes still sat on the mantelpiece, untouched, like a cruel joke. The sound of Daniel's car pulling into the driveway made her heart slam against her ribs. She stood slowly, every step toward the hallway heavier than the last. Tonight, there would be no pretending. No swallowing pain. She had seen too much. He entered with his usual confidence, setting his briefcase down and removing his coat like nothing was wrong. His eyes finally met hers, and in them, there was no surprise. No guilt. Just resignation, maybe even irritation. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but brittle. He sighed. "Can this wait? I've had a long—" "No. It can't." She took a breath, bracing herself. "I saw you, Daniel. At the Fairmont. With Cassandra." A long silence followed. He didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He just ran a hand through his hair and looked away, as if mildly inconvenienced. "I figured it would come out eventually," he muttered. "That's it." Her voice cracked. 20 years, and that's all you have to say?" Daniel crossed the room and poured himself a glass of whiskey, casually, like they were discussing stock options. "What do you want me to say, Sarah? That I'm sorry? I'm not." Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You're sleeping with your assistant. A woman young enough to be your daughter. She makes me feel alive," he said bluntly. "Not like this slow, controlled existence we've lived for years. You and your schedules, your quiet expectations, your constant sadness. You think that's what love is?" Sarah's body trembled. "I gave up everything for you. My career. My independence. And now, when I'm finally pregnant with the child we've both prayed for, you throw me away." Daniel took a sip of his drink. "She's pregnant too." The words hit like a blow to the chest. The room tilted. The air thinned. "I don't love you anymore, Sarah," he said, unblinking. "I haven't for a long time. I stayed out of loyalty. Out of habit. But I can't keep pretending." Her vision blurred. A sharp pain pierced her abdomen. She staggered backward, her hands reaching for support. Her breath grew shallow, and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "Daniel," she whispered. He didn't move to help her. Instead, he set down his glass. "You're always so dramatic." The world went dark before she hit the floor. And as she lay unconscious, the man who once vowed to love her in sickness and in health stood above her. Not with fear or concern, but with a cold indifference that shattered every remaining piece of her heart. The silence that followed Sarah's collapse was replaced by something far worse. The slow, calculated dismantling of her life. She awoke in a hospital bed, disoriented, with an 4 in her arm and a monitor beeping beside her. The doctor assured her the baby was safe, for now, but she needed rest, both physical and emotional. Daniel never showed up. Instead, 3 days later, she was served with separation papers. Delivered by a stranger in a crisp suit, the documents were cold, emotionless, and brutally direct. Daniel was seeking full ownership of all assets, including the estate, and he was demanding that Sarah vacate the property within a week. No negotiation. No discussion. Sarah clutched the papers in disbelief, her hands trembling. After 20 years, 2 decades of sacrifice, loyalty, and devotion, this was how it ended? With legal threats and eviction notices? She refused to leave. The estate had been her home since they first built it together. She had chosen every detail, from the Italian tiles in the kitchen to the pale lavender nursery now waiting quietly upstairs. She wasn't going to be forced out like an intruder in her own life. Days passed, tension rising with each one. Daniel didn't come back in person. He didn't speak to her at all. Instead, more letters arrived from his lawyers. Then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang, and everything unraveled. 3 men in black suits entered, led by a private security team Daniel had hired. They showed her a court order. One coldly informed her that she was being legally removed from the premises. Sarah's protests meant nothing. She pleaded, shouted, even cried, But no one listened. They didn't care that she was pregnant, or heartbroken, or terrified. She was dragged out of the mansion barefoot, her belongings thrown haphazardly into garbage bags and cardboard boxes. Her long robe dragged against the pavement as she stumbled to the front gate. Cameras flashed. Dozens of paparazzi had been tipped off, waiting for their shot. And they got it. Photos of Sarah, disheveled, red-eyed, clutching her swollen stomach in horror, circulated online within hours. Headlines screamed, "Pregnant wife evicted from billionaire mansion." But the tone quickly shifted. Daniel's PR team spun a different story. Daniel Montgomery finds love after years of heartache, one article read. New flame Cassandra saves business tycoon from toxic marriage, said another. The narrative had been rewritten. Sarah was no longer the devoted wife, she was the bitter, hysterical ex. And Cassandra, with her perfect smile and designer wardrobe, had become the glowing new chapter in Daniel's fairy tale. No one asked Sarah what she felt. No one cared that she was living out of a hotel room, growing a child in the midst of trauma. She had become a scandal, a tabloid headline, a cautionary tale of what happened when women couldn't keep their husbands interested. She stared at her reflection in the hotel mirror that night. Mascara smudged, lips chapped, her hand resting protectively over her belly. They had taken her home. But they hadn't taken her fight. The apartment was small, barely furnished, and nothing like the marble halls she once walked. But it was quiet. Safe. Her name was on the lease, not Daniel's, not the company's. Just hers. That, in itself, felt like a victory. Eliza had insisted on helping her move. She'd shown up with bags of groceries, cozy throw blankets, and a stubborn kind of love that refused to let Sarah fall apart. They unpacked boxes together, placing framed photos on chipped wooden shelves, trying to create warmth out of broken beginnings. Sarah stood by the narrow kitchen window one morning, holding a cup of tea in her hands. The scent of chamomile filled the air, grounding her as she looked out at the city skyline. It wasn't the view she used to have, but it was hers now. And in that stillness, memories began to flood in. She saw herself in her early 20s again, brilliant, driven, a rising star in corporate law. Daniel had been just a dreamer back then, pitching startup ideas in coffee shops and promising her a future where they'd conquer the world together. He'd kissed her hand after her bar exam, told her she was the smartest woman he'd ever met. "I need you by my side," he had whispered one night after a long dinner, his eyes shining. "We'll build something great, together." And she'd believed him. So she left the firm. Gave up her corner office, her fast track to partner, and devoted herself to his empire. She managed operations, smoothed over investor disputes, and curated the perfect image of a power couple. Every gala, every interview, every handshake photo, she had been there, smiling, shaping the myth. And now, when the cameras turned on her, she was painted as a footnote. The bitter ex. The forgotten wife. But standing in that modest apartment, her hand gently resting on her growing belly, Sarah felt something stir inside her, a quiet but burning resolve. She had lost a home, a husband, and the life she once knew. But she hadn't lost herself. This baby wasn't a weakness. It was her reason. Her anchor. And from now on, she would fight. Not just for survival, but for justice, for truth, for everything that had been stolen from her. Daniel had written her out of his story. Now, she was going to write her own. Cassandra's face was everywhere. On glossy magazine covers, in viral social media clips, and on morning talk shows, glowing in her designer gowns with a barely there baby bump. She spoke sweetly but with veiled venom, referring to Sarah as the emotionally unstable ex, and painting herself as the woman who rescued Daniel from years of unhappiness. The public, craving drama, devoured every word. "I only wish Sarah peace," Cassandra would say with an exaggerated pout. "She needs time to heal, and Daniel and I want to focus on our future, especially with our little miracle on the way." Sarah watched one of the interviews in stunned silence, her hands clenched into fists. She hadn't responded publicly to any of the rumors or insults. She'd kept quiet, hoping the truth would find its way to the surface. But now, with her character being butchered and Cassandra flaunting the life she stole, Sarah knew silence wouldn't protect her anymore. Eliza had warned her from the beginning, Cassandra is hiding something. And now Sarah was ready to find out what. She hired a private investigator, a quiet, gray-haired man named Vincent who specialized in high-profile corporate and personal cases. "Don't trust anything that sparkles too much," he'd said, flipping open his notepad. "Let's see what's underneath the shine." It didn't take long. Vincent uncovered that Cassandra had a string of relationships with older, wealthy men, one of whom had filed a restraining order after she drained tens of thousands from his account. Another had mysteriously lost his company after promoting her to a financial position. She had a pattern: get close, gain trust, exploit power. Even more shocking, Cassandra had manipulated Daniel into believing her pregnancy aligned perfectly with Sarah's. But medical records from a private clinic told another story. The timelines didn't match. The pregnancy had likely been fabricated or, at best, massively exaggerated to trap him. Vincent even discovered altered documents filed within Montgomery Enterprises accounts, unauthorized transfers, ghost contractors, and untraceable expenses all pointing back to Cassandra's department. Sarah sat with the file in her lap, page after page of lies, theft, and deceit. Proof. Not just of betrayal, but of manipulation on a scale Daniel had no idea he was part of. For the first time in months, she didn't feel helpless. She felt powerful. The mistress had played her part. Now it was time for the truth to take center stage. Sarah sat in the back of a sleek black car, the manila folder resting on her lap like a loaded weapon. Inside were dozens of documents, bank transfers, forged invoices, altered medical records. Evidence of Cassandra's web of lies. The city lights flickered past the tinted windows, but Sarah's gaze was steady, focused. Tonight was no longer about heartbreak. It was about justice. She had timed everything perfectly. That morning, her legal team had delivered full documentation to Montgomery Enterprises' board of directors. By afternoon, the media had received carefully prepared press packets with the entire timeline of Cassandra's financial misconduct, complete with anonymous testimonies from former employees and whistleblowers. And by evening, she'd been invited to appear on national television for a live interview. When Cassandra arrived at the corporate headquarters later that day, cameras already surrounded her. She smiled, waved, touched her stomach for the perfect shot. But within minutes, her expression changed. Two federal agents approached, flashing badges. She barely had time to ask what was happening before they escorted her away in handcuffs. The footage went viral within hours. Billionaire's mistress arrested in corporate fraud scandal. CEO's girlfriend faces charges of embezzlement and identity deception. Daniel Montgomery's empire shaken by pregnant girlfriend's crimes. And Daniel. He was blindsided. Board members turned on him swiftly, launching an internal audit of all departments. Shareholders demanded answers. Montgomery Enterprises' stock plummeted within 24 hours, billions wiped from the market in a wave of panic. He was forced to step down from his CEO position temporarily pending investigation, though some whispered he might never recover. Meanwhile, Sarah stood on a quiet stage at a women's advocacy conference, wearing a simple navy dress, her baby bump now proudly visible beneath the fabric. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. She approached the microphone with calm confidence. "I never imagined I'd be here today," she began. Not as the former wife of a powerful man, but as a woman who learned that silence doesn't protect the truth. "For months, I endured betrayal, public humiliation, and emotional violence in the shadows. But I'm here to say that no one, gets to rewrite your story but you." Her voice was strong. Steady. Her words resonated with millions who had followed the scandal. She didn't name Cassandra or Daniel. She didn't have to. The truth had done what years of sacrifice couldn't, it had set her free. As she left the podium, applause thundered through the hall. Sarah didn't smile for the cameras this time. She didn't have to. She had reclaimed her power. And now, the world finally saw her not as a broken wife, but as the woman who brought the truth to light and refused to be silenced. The hospital room was quiet, dimly lit by a soft overhead glow. Machines beeped rhythmically, and rain tapped gently against the window. Sarah lay propped against a stack of pillows, cradling the tiny bundle swaddled in soft blue fabric. Her baby boy. His eyes blinked slowly, still adjusting to the world, his tiny fingers curling instinctively around hers. She had named him Noah. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from pain, but from the overwhelming flood of emotion that crashed over her as she looked into his face. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a little tuft of dark hair, and a heartbeat strong enough to remind her why she had fought so hard. She was alone when he came into the world. No father pacing the hallway. No family member to hold her hand. Just nurses, doctors, and her own fierce will to survive. And yet, in that moment, she didn't feel weak. She felt powerful, complete. Like everything that had been broken in her was now being gently stitched back together. She whispered to him through soft sobs, "You'll never feel what I felt. You'll never question if you're wanted. I promise you, Noah, you will always know love. You will always know worth." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and quiet strength. While Noah slept beside her in a bassinet, Sarah worked on something bigger than herself. She poured her savings and passion into building a nonprofit, a sanctuary for women like her. Women who had been discarded, shamed, or forgotten. Women who needed more than sympathy, they needed a lifeline. She called it the Sparrow Foundation, a nod to the nickname Daniel had once given her, now reclaimed for herself. The organization launched quietly, with a simple mission: to provide shelter, legal aid, job training, and emotional support for single and abandoned mothers. But when her story, her full, unfiltered journey, was posted on her blog and later shared by national outlets, the world paid attention. People wept reading her words. Donations poured in. Celebrities endorsed her cause. Sarah, once seen as the sobbing woman in tabloid headlines, became a symbol of resilience. A mother. A fighter. A builder of hope. As she stood in the nursery one night, Noah sleeping peacefully in her arms, Sarah didn't think of the betrayal, the fall, or even the revenge. She thought of the future. And for the first time in a long time, it looked bright. Daniel stood outside the community center, hidden behind the tinted windows of a black town car. The once powerful tycoon was barely recognizable now. Disheveled hair, dark circles beneath his eyes, the crisp arrogance he used to wear like a tailored suit now stripped away. He watched through the rain-speckled glass as Sarah stepped out of the building, holding a tiny boy wrapped in a gray knit blanket. Noah. His son. The child he had never held. Never met. Never even seen outside of photographs on charity flyers or social media posts he couldn't avoid. Sarah looked different too. Not broken, not bitter. Strong. Grounded. Her smile was soft as she cradled the baby and chatted with volunteers. She didn't look like someone who had once begged him not to leave. She looked like someone who had moved on. Daniel's life had unraveled faster than he could have imagined. Cassandra was sitting in a federal facility, awaiting trial on multiple charges: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. The media had turned on him the moment the truth came out. Investors fled. The board ousted him. The company he built from nothing now teetered on the edge of bankruptcy, its assets frozen pending investigations. He lived in a penthouse rented under someone else's name, the mansion sold to pay legal fees. Friends had vanished. Business partners had gone silent. No one wanted their names tied to a scandal that had gone international. He had sent Sarah letters, called, even tried to show up at her apartment once. But she never responded. Not once. And now, as he watched her kiss Noah's forehead and strap him gently into his stroller, Daniel felt a pain he couldn't drink or bargain his way out of. He had thought he'd traded up, traded predictability for passion, stability for excitement. He told himself that Sarah was just a chapter, not the whole story. But standing there, watching the woman he betrayed raise the son he'd never know, he finally understood. He hadn't just lost a marriage. He'd lost the only people who ever truly loved him. Not for his money, not for his name, but for the man he used to be. And now, there was no going back. Sarah didn't even glance in his direction as she walked past, her chin high, her purpose clear. Daniel stayed in the car, drowning in the silence he had created. 1 year later, the gates of the grand estate opened once more, but this time, not for luxury galas or high society guests. This time, women walked through with trembling hands and tear-streaked faces, carrying children or clutching nothing but the clothes on their backs. The mansion that once echoed with the cold silence of betrayal now pulsed with warmth, laughter, and hope. Sarah had bought it back, every room, every brick. The same estate Daniel had thrown her out of now belonged solely to her. Renovated with soft colors, safe rooms, child-care spaces, therapy offices, and dormitories, it stood as a fortress for healing, renamed the Haven House. Sarah stood in what used to be the nursery she had decorated during her final days in the house as a wife. Now, it was a nursery again, but this time, for every mother who needed it. Noah, almost a year old now, toddled along the soft rug, his fingers curled around a stuffed lion. He giggled as he fell onto a beanbag, then looked up at her with wide, trusting eyes. She lifted him into her arms and whispered, "We made it, baby. We really did." Her foundation had grown beyond anything she had imagined. With branches opening in London, Nairobi, and Manila, the Sparrow Foundation had become a global beacon for women fleeing abuse and abandonment. She had been invited to speak at international conferences on resilience, justice, motherhood, and leadership. At one, she stood next to world leaders, her speech drawing a standing ovation. When a reporter asked her, "What's your proudest moment?" she smiled and said, "Holding my son while holding on to myself." Though people tried to bring up Daniel in interviews, Sarah never gave him more than a passing sentence. "That chapter is over," she would say. The story moved on. And it had. She no longer cried about the betrayal. It shaped her, but didn't define her. The anger had passed, leaving behind clarity and calm. As she watched the sun dip below the estate's wide gardens, casting gold light over Noah's cheeks, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She had been broken, shattered, even. But now, she had risen, stronger than ever. And she was never going back.